Stories grip our imagination. They pull us in, they tug at our heartstrings, they inspire us, motivate us, and even scare us. Stories move us. I've interviewed Hollywood actors and producers who say people come up to them and say, "Hey, I don't agree with your environmental rant, but I like that rain bucket you told me about. Tell me about that." Or, "I don't think about climate change, but I'm intrigued that you're saving a fortune with a heat pump and solar panels. Tell me about that." I mean, these told stories that resonated with those people. So how do we leverage stories to motivate people to take a bunch of big and small actions that help save our communities from extreme weather and make our lives better, frankly? It's such a polarized time. Today we're going to find out some cool tips from a master storyteller who just wrote a new book about it. So put on your earbuds or turn up the volume, grab a pen and pad or tablet to take notes, and let's get started. Welcome to Electric Ladies Podcast. We share stories, insights, tips, and advice from remarkably innovative women working on the front lines of corporate responsibility, energy, sustainability, and climate-related issues. I'm your host, Joan Michelson. We talk about innovation, leadership, technologies, and careers, always bringing a new perspective. Find us anywhere you like to listen to podcasts on our website, electricladiespodcast.com, and through my articles as well. And please pass it on to your friends and leave us a 5-star review. It helps other people find us. One more thing before we get started. If you are at an inflection point yourself, looking for support with your ESG work or your career, please reach out to me in all the chaos around us. There is also a lot of opportunity, and we don't want you to be flailing. Your talents are valuable. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn at Joan Michelson and let me know. We can help you no matter what industry you're in. Great dramas, great movies, great comedies, even leaders and politicians with compelling stories pull us in. Maybe we felt that way at some point. Maybe a similar experience. Maybe they just transported our imagination. Storytelling is in many ways a kind of magic. We relate to people on some level from the stories they tell. So how do we use storytelling to inspire people, to reach more people, to take actions, to take small actions in their daily lives, as well as bigger actions by leaders and influencers or movements to avert a climate crisis, to solve some of the social issues around us? A time when, frankly, words can turn people off pretty easily and our attention spans are milliseconds. I mean, no one wants their house or business floating down a river or flooded or engulfed in flames from wildfires, right? We need all this stuff, but how do we reach people? Let's ask a journalist and professional communicator who just wrote a book about it. I'd like you to meet Melissa Jun Rowley. She's a journalist, activist, and entrepreneur focused on the intersection of social innovation, media, and climate. She's the founder of Climate Mic Drop events that harness the power of storytelling to accelerate climate justice across sectors, boundaries, and cultures. She's currently Director of Communications at Reverb, which creates partnerships between environmental initiatives and leading artists like Billie Eilish, for example, to decarbonize live shows and mobilize their millions of fans around climate and social action. Along those lines, she previously co-founded The Toolbox with legendary musician and activist Peter Gabriel to provide digital tools for social entrepreneurs in developing countries. And to our conversation today, she's the author of the new book, Beyond the Mic Drop: How Our Stories Can Shift Culture, Power, and Policy. She has designed communication strategies and campaigns to accelerate a range of social causes, including decarbonization, gender equity, and environmental justice. And I would be here for a week telling you her entire bio, but suffice it to say, she was also a producer at CNN, has advised the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub, the World Bank, blah, blah, blah. And Melissa earned her bachelor's degree in broadcast journalism at Ithaca College. And full disclosure, Melissa is a friend of mine. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Melissa Jun Rowley to Electric Ladies Podcast. Welcome, Melissa. Congratulations on your new book, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Joan. I'm so great to connect with you here. And I love your podcast voice, by the way.
Oh, sure. Thank you. I appreciate that. So let's start off with this. How are we doing today in telling the climate story and engaging people on it? Like, let's set the table for where we are now.
As a movement, I don't think we're doing very well. And that doesn't mean that there aren't tremendously talented creators and storytellers working within the climate movement that I think are doing a good job. But as a movement, we're not there. And it's especially tough right now with all the environmental rollbacks happening in the United States and with a lack of funding going into ESG, and with it just not being what's cool now to support or invest in for a number of reasons. I think it's mainly federal government based. With the EPA being basically corrupt, we're fighting an uphill battle right now because of this current administration. But beyond that, before that, the reason that I started Climate Mic Drop, which is just an event series right now, it could turn into a larger media platform at some point, but I tell this story a lot. A few years ago, when I was in Dubai in Expo City at COP28, I was tired and hot and sweaty. I couldn't find my next session. So I sat down on a bench and got an ice cream. And there was like peanut butter and strawberry swirl going down my face. And I was just looking at the crowd around me. And it was so rich and beautifully diverse. There were corporate carbon markets professionals in their suits on one side of the street. There were youth activists huddled in the green. Over behind me, there were indigenous elders wearing their traditional feathers and walking with signs. There were climate tech bros in Innovation Alley pitching VCs. There were solar bros on the other side of the street. It was so diverse, but it was also very siloed. And I remember thinking a movement that operates in silos can't move together. And after working in different spaces that are climate action focused, whether it's the World Bank or the UN or small group grassroots nonprofits and communities, or the creative side, there's a great community of storytellers, filmmakers, and documentarians that are trying to get the creative juices flowing in the climate movement. We're not really functioning together. And so we don't really speak the same language. And the language in general of the climate movement is terrible. The vernacular is terrible. Nobody knows what 1.5 degrees Celsius means, except for the scientists who told us about it and those of us working in the space. Net zero means nothing to the average everyday American. And it doesn't mean that these terms aren't relevant or important in specific spaces, but we need to make the language just more accessible, more relatable, more human-centered stories. And again, there are efforts being made for this. I remember being at the Sundance Film Festival last year, and there being multiple panels on how do we tell the story of nature? What would nature sound like if it had its own voice? And it actually does. It has a million voices. It has infinite voices, right? But there are so many efforts by creatives to do this, but I think the creative community needs to intersect more with the corporate ecosystem, and the corporate ecosystem needs to talk more to the frontline grassroots organizers. And we just need to come together more. Otherwise, we're never going to develop a more unified narrative. But we have an opportunity to. If you think of how big the climate movement is, how global it is, and the urgent place that we've been in for decades now, and how it keeps getting worse, right? Every summer, every headline is the hottest summer on record. That happens every summer now. Okay, great. Then what are we doing about it? What is the forward action? What's the narrative that we want people to hear? And what are the stories that people can participate in and see themselves in? I think that's one of the keys that we can unlock when it comes to the whole climate narrative, is telling stories that build the scaffolding blocks to a larger narrative that people want to be a part of. And we need to make it feel inevitable, right? Doom right now feels inevitable, with wars going on all around us, with healthcare being omitted from a number of people's lives, with ICE raids happening, with so much injustice. Doom just feels inevitable. But the way that justice prevails, whether it's environmental justice or any kind of justice, I think it's that the leaders make it feel inevitable. And that's the climate movement's job. And I think we have every opportunity and ability to do that.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, Martin Luther King Jr. did that. He made civil rights feel inevitable, right? So, what is the narrative that we need now? Just to let's answer your questions, right? What is the narrative we need now? What are the stories we need now that will bridge that? I mean, I'm so glad you're talking about this because I talk about this too. That we need to be bridges, right? We need to use the power of what we know and people's day-to-day experiences, like I used in the introduction. I mean, there's people who say I don't believe in climate change, but I also don't want my house flooding and or floating down the river or up in flames. And so how do we do that? What are the narratives, and what are narratives that can bridge that gap?
I think that any stories that highlight transformation, some kind of personal transformation, are always wins, right? The greatest stories in the world, the greatest films, are always about some kind of personal transformation. The lead character goes through some shit and they come out on the other side better or more enlightened or stronger or just more confident. And so I like to look at stories that highlight an unexpected messenger, right? Really, in the climate movement, it's a bit of a popularity contest, the climate movement, right? And I'm in some of those circles and I understand how that happens. And we need sexy, fashionable, young, beautiful, and just prestigious, big, thought-provoking figures in the climate movement to make a splash. But those same voices get rotated over and over again often because of the popularity contest. And so what if we highlighted more unexpected messengers, like a rural farmer who's always voted Republican, but then one day learned that understanding climate adaptation will help him yield better crops, right? I think unexpected messengers is a great way to go. And also, obviously, solutions focused communication, solutions focused journalism is always a high for people. Because there are so many solutions, big ones, small ones. It's just the systems that we're operating on aren't changing, right? And but there's all kinds of alternatives to plastics. There's so much renewable energy innovation happening on a regular basis. There's so much growth in that field. There's instances like the nonprofit that I currently work for, Reverb, that makes the music industry more sustainable by powering big festivals with hybrid or cleaner power and by engaging fans with local nonprofits that the artists we work with love. There are nonprofits doing incredible work on the ground every single day. And so I think if we can also just take people through those journeys of transformation. We started here, but look where we are now. Look at this new regenerative mindset that we have now. So much of our problems, I think, lies in the systems that we live in because they weren't built with equity in mind, right? Our financial systems, education systems, government systems. But the way that I look at systems, and I've talked about this recently at a few different events, and I don't say it necessarily, I don't articulate this outright in the book, but the way I look at systems is they started as ideas. They started as ideas that turned into larger narratives, and they were repeated so many times that they ultimately turned into infrastructure that businesses and voters and people got behind. It felt inevitable. And so when we're looking at things like our healthcare system, people will say things like, well, it's just always been this way. But it wasn't anything at first. It started with an idea and it got built on stories that became a narrative. And we know that we can rewrite stories, right? We know that we can rewrite our own personal stories about who we are, about how lovable we are, about how worthy we are. We can do the same thing with other facets of life. And if we can rewrite stories, we have a chance at those influencing these larger broken systems that were never designed for all of us in the first place.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll cover a lot of those. I mean, that's my whole, my show is all people who are developing solutions of one kind or another. From, Ina Braverman, who survived Chernobyl as literally an infant, to develop eco wave ocean power technology that's winning all kinds of awards and is much simpler than a lot of the big ocean wave things that are these huge contraptions, and hers is not, So, I mean, there's stories abound, and women in Africa who are doing, magic with bubblegum and rubber bands, basically. There are so many great stories to tell. How can you tell whether when you have, I guess I want to say it's a lousy way to put it, but the right stories for a climate, energy, sustainability purpose that's going to resonate with people? I mean, how can you tell when you found it? How can you tell what's going to work without kind of over engineering it either? Because it has to feel natural.
Well, it definitely depends on the audience, right? You know how earlier I was just talking about the different cliques that I was seeing at COP28 when I was dehydrated and passing out on the bench, and I saw the different subgroups of the climate movement. So it depends on the audience, but I don't know if I would use the word right stories or just better, more expansive, more just, more human. I think the more human, the the more human, the more relatable, the more equitable, right? So I'll give you an example. When I was at COP16 a couple years ago, which was the biodiversity and nature focused conference, I wasn't planning on going to the blue zone. The blue zone is where a lot of the big corporations and the diplomats and heads of state speak. And I was more or less staying in the green zone. The green zone is more kind of grassroots, nonprofit friendly, more community focused. But I went to the blue zone because friends of mine at a nonprofit called Amazon Frontlines, which is focused on environmental justice and working with indigenous leaders from the Amazon to get their land back, they asked me if I would interview a couple of indigenous leaders that they sent in their delegation. And I didn't want to miss that opportunity. So I went over there and I interviewed 4 different indigenous leaders. It was mainly men, 1 woman, and I had a translator there for me. And I asked her, I had my translator ask the indigenous leader, the woman, I said, it was this like warrior leader in her nation. Mm-hmm. So what do you think about being at events like this, at something as big as COP? Does being here in front of these governments and heads of state and big corporations make a difference in your mission? And she kind of rolled her eyes and not a rude way toward me, but just kind of like, she just kind of slightly rolled her eyes and she said, on the one hand, coming here does make a difference for visibility because we're speaking on these big stages, these sought after stages, right? And so we do get attention and people applaud us. But then after that happens, a group of people go into a back room to make negotiations and they come out with a piece of paper and we're not involved in those conversations at all. And it just really stung when she said that. It stung her more than me, but I don't know if I didn't ever think of it that way. I guess I was just naive, but yeah, they're the indigenous leaders at this conference in Colombia, in South America, not invited into the negotiation rooms around how governments are going to agree on how to protect biodiversity and nature. Indigenous people, as many of your listeners probably know, protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. So to not have any indigenous leaders in those conversations is the most ridiculous dichotomy, but we shouldn't be surprised, right? And so I think that not so much the right story to tell, but a better plan and a more equitable plan and story to craft, not just for optics, but for actual impact, would have been for the COP organizers to bring indigenous people in those conversations. And so one of the things that I talk about a little bit in my book and when I'm giving storytelling workshops is don't just look at who's on stage and who's got the mic. Look at who's not there, right? Think of who's impacted by the decisions that are made, yet they're not having any kind of voice on that stage. And how many times do we go to big global events where there are leaders and some with beautiful intentions, some not. But how many times do we go to these big global convenings when the people that are impacted most by the decisions are not there? Most of the time.
As you say, not on the stage, right?
They don't have the mic.
Interesting. It's a conundrum because on one hand, if they're taking action for their own reason that we may not agree with, but at least they're taking action, then I don't really care how the sausage is made. On the other hand, these nuances need to be included, and these voices. I mean, I remember the classic example is years ago, General Motors launched a car in Latin America called Nova, and it's like means doesn't move in Spanish, basically. Obviously, nobody who spoke Spanish was at the table designing the vehicle or the marketing plan for the vehicle, right? It's like, hello. So, or they weren't comfortable speaking up, or women not being at the table, and that for a policy decision where the policy would affect their daily lives and they'd be the ones that are affected by it. And it's like, well, no wonder it's not working. You didn't have the actual people who are having to interact with that policy at the table, right? So, but the story, so to your point, basically it sounds like what you're saying is the story has to move the audience that you're trying to move, right? So if we're working with corporates, we have to tell a story that way. But I would think that, you use this great phrase in your book called the grammar of emotion. And I would think that if we can touch the stories, this is the magic that I'm talking about in the introduction, of stories touch us in a way that really is magical and we can't really define, right? And it touches each of us sometimes very, very differently. I'll remember one thing, you'll remember something else, depending upon our own experience, right? So how do we talk about the grammar of emotion and how you started to do this a little bit, but the story arc, how you fit the grammar of emotion into the story arc, tie that together. You started to go through, like, start with this and, look at who's not at the table, basically on the stage, but who's affected by it. But how do you, like, if somebody's listening today and they're creating a campaign or they're creating some kind of campaign for something, or even just crafting a story for a speech or something, how do you suggest that, but they want to move people, right? So how do you suggest they go about doing that? And what's the grammar of emotion?
Yeah, I'm glad you like that phrase, the grammar of emotion. I didn't know if it would be kind of too cheesy for some people, but again, whatever. You're not going to please everybody, but I'm glad you like that phrase, Joan. So the grammar of emotion, the way that I framed that in that particular chapter, I think the chapter is called The Grammar of Emotion. I was in Casablanca and I was supposed to give a keynote address to a room full of women entrepreneurs from across the Middle East. It was an entrepreneur competition put on between my friend's organization Voyage and the World Bank. And I was a judge for the competition part, but before that, they wanted me to talk about my life and my career journey and all these things. And so I was going to use slides and talk about different milestones and things like that. And then it just seemed inauthentic, and it didn't really seem relevant because I was standing in front of these women, the entrepreneurs, many of the entrepreneurs in the room were women from Lebanon. We all know what's happening in Lebanon right now. That's nearly 200 people were killed yesterday. But this was years before that. But a lot of these women from Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Morocco. And so they build their startups out of survival. It's not just to get their Series A and be in a headline on TechCrunch and then exit. It's to create jobs and to support having a more resilient community. And so telling a story about just a mechanical story about my career just didn't feel right. And so I threw out the slides and I talked about a time when I was living on my best friend's couch, which was during the recession and the year right after the recession. So looking at 2009-ish, when I was freelancing for CNN, I had been full-time producing for CNN Business News in New York. So when I moved to LA, I was freelancing for entertainment, interviewing celebrities on red carpets and going to film premieres and the Oscars. And that was a very fun chapter. And when the recession hit, media got hit really hard. I think it was one of the first industries, even though nobody was talking about it. most of the focus was on Wall Street and the housing market. And so I was out of a job for a long time. I couldn't find any work. And I moved up to San Francisco, lived on my best friend's couch for a number of months. And I was writing blog posts for $15. I was writing blog posts about social impact and technology for $15 a hit. And obviously I wasn't able to pay rent with that, but it was kind of the humility of that, right? Like the going back to the basics of who am I? What do I even want to be doing right now? And how do I feel like I can contribute in some way and support people? And that was through story. And so I started using Twitter, early adopter Twitter days. I'm no longer on Twitter since Twitter. I was on Twitter when after Elon Musk bought it for maybe another year. And then I had to get off because I couldn't stand looking at his tweets anymore. So I was talking about entrepreneurs. Back then it was the term social entrepreneur was very popular. I'm glad that that's kind of faded, because I think any entrepreneur, we should just be entrepreneurship. We don't need to make a subcategory for people using entrepreneurship for good. And I was writing about these incredible founders that were harnessing technology for social impact. And I kind of reinvented myself through social media. And then I started talking to companies that needed content, that needed storytelling internally. Ultimately, that led to me meeting Peter Gabriel through a long chain of events. And then after my time working with Peter and living in the Middle East, I started my own agency. And so I, rather than starting with facts and kind of like the high level, here are my accomplishments and here's what I did and here's what I think you should do, I started with a very vulnerable story, because I figured that would resonate more with these women than the high notes, right? There are high notes that I got to talk about later, but I think people underestimate how much sharing stories of struggle really works. That doesn't mean that I think that we should just bombard people with our trauma right out of the gate. And that I think that everything needs to start with, this was the hardest thing that ever happened in my life. That it was a story of transformation in some ways. And I really do believe that the greatest stories are always about transformation in some shape or form. So the grammar of emotion is really diving deep into those vulnerable stories. They could be stories that we're even ashamed of. I was ashamed of being broke and living on my best friend's couch for 6 months. I thought I was a total failure. I was ashamed of only earning $15 per blog post and it taking me so long to figure out a new way to make a living. I was taking all kinds of weird jobs, telemarketing jobs, selling reading programs, doing this and that. And it was when I finally focused on doing something that I knew I was good at, getting back to my why, getting back to telling stories that I hoped can help inform people and, help be an active service. That's when the change came. And so I started with that story. It was very emotional, and that's where the grammar of emotion idea came from. But I think most of us know by now that you got to hit people. You got to strike an emotional chord with people if you want them to move. I mean, sometimes it's money, but, for a lot of people, money is emotional. Money is emotional. Money is never neutral, right? So there's, I think just everything moves from emotion. One of the things that I used to tell my team back when I was running my company, Warrior Love Productions, a few years ago, was when you understand people, the more you get to understand people, the more you'll understand business. The more you understand what motivates people and what drives them, the more you're going to be able to operate your business better. That's kind of a little non sequitur from what we were just talking about, but I don't say this in the book, but something that I truly believe and do not always live by, because I have my own insecurities and fears and issues and ego and all the things, is we reach our next level of power when we dive into a deeper level of vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And that's the foundation of the grammar of emotion.
Yeah, 100%. And it's an interesting time to be doing that. I mean, people in this moment of crisis across culture and economy, everybody's having their crisis of vulnerability in a different way, but at the same time, right? And it's interesting what you said about money. As you know, I'm writing a book about women and wealth and impact, and there's so much tied up in it. A lot of it goes back to, and you kind of talk about this a bit in the book, which we'll get to in a minute, but it goes back to kind of what our experience with money is, what our um, what our experiences have been, and even the family dynamics and friends and various experiences, how we've been treated in the workforce, et cetera, how well we were paid by people who we worked for, et cetera, that triggers its own set of emotions, right? And that's the other tricky part, is that what will trigger an emotion for you and me might not trigger an emotion or motivate somebody who hasn't had the experiences that we've had, right? They might need to be moved differently. So when you want to motivate people, and do you start with the story? Where do you start? I mean, I was listening to something yesterday, and they were talking about starting with a hook and then creating the content around the hook. But where do you start? Like, if you've worked with different organizations, but they're all kind of in this nexus of culture and purpose and business together. So when you're developing a campaign, what do you start with when you want to motivate people to a particular cause?
That's a really excellent, loaded question, because again, I hope you're not irritated with my initial response, which is it does depend on the audience for sure. But no matter what, it's got to be, you need to launch with something that grabs people emotionally, right? And that could be some kind of unique trait that this brand has. That could be some kind of unique facet of what they're doing. So I have a story to share. So I was just in Minneapolis 2 weeks ago. I was there for No Kings. I was in the media pit, so I got a great shot of Bruce Springsteen and Joan Baez and Bernie Sanders and Maggie Rogers and everybody who spoke, and it was so joyful, and I had no idea how much I needed to be in that energy, but it felt so amazing to be there. And a few days later, I spoke at an event called Beta State of the State, which was organized by my friend, Angela Eifort. She's the executive director of Beta, which is a startup ecosystem supporter. And State of the State is all about what is the state of Minnesota right now, of our startup and innovation community. And, for sure, the business landscape in Minneapolis and St. Paul and across the whole state has been hit hard. It was incredibly damaged by Operation Metro Surge, by all the ICE raids. And so the local economy is still suffering. There are different small businesses that are running mutual aid hubs. There's this sex shop called Smitten Kitten that became a mutual aid hub. There's a synagogue that's raised hundreds and thousands of dollars. There's a pizzeria that's been raising money for nonprofits. And so the startup ecosystem, which is more kind of software and high tech and AI based, I think they have an opportunity to build on that story of solidarity and community and really create a new identity for the startup and innovation ecosystem at large in Minnesota. And so in a way, I guess it's kind of newsjacking. Are you familiar with that term?
Newsjacking? I'm not. Yeah, I can kind of picture what it is, but explain.
Yeah, it's not the most eloquent of terms. It's basically a way of saying, looking at what's going on in the news, what's happening in current events, and then making sure that you have a stance on it, a position, and bringing that into your larger narrative. How do you feel about what's happening? What do you think about the war in Iran and how it's affecting global business? Yeah, the markets are up, but that doesn't mean oil prices are going down, right? So that's one example, right? So when I say Minneapolis has a chance to, the reason I bring up newsjacking for Minneapolis, and I think there's a kinder word for saying it, but they have an opportunity. There's still enough in the national conversation because No Kings just happened there 2 weeks ago. And I don't hope this isn't true, but I feel like they could get targeted again for something else. Ever since last summer, just these things have been happening to that state, right? Melissa Horton, representative, was killed, and then there was a horrible school shooting shortly after that, and then Operation Metro Surge, but the community came together so rapidly. Neighbors, friends, local businesses, and the startup community also responded. There's a startup called Turn Signal, which provides legal services that became very useful for people when the ICE raids were happening. And so I think that the startup community has an opportunity to craft a new narrative around who they are, what they stand for, and who they want to be in the future. Every startup ecosystem that I've ever lived in or written about can do that. And I've lived in many. I lived in Silicon Valley, Los Angeles, New York, Puerto Rico, Lebanon, Jordan, Paris. I've spent enough time immersed in all of these startup communities. And while they all have similarities, they each have something very unique about the way that they operate and what they stand for because of their own unique culture. What happens in Lebanon startups is different than what Puerto Rico startups focus on. And so I was sharing this at Beta State of the State at the event I spoke at, just saying, now's the time, right? Now's the time that, Minneapolis and St. Paul showed up in such a beautiful way, supporting one another, right? And standing in solidarity, protecting one another. They're still doing it. They're still watching different, they're still watching the Whipple building, which is the federal building where people are taken in detention. And there's still people, watching that. There's still people bringing neighbors to immigrants or people that could be, that could be searched because of the way they look, and they're afraid to go to work. Still, there's still the aftermath of Operation Metro Surge is going to be going on for a long time. So the local business community, these small mom and pop shops that I entered, and the startup community still are addressing that. And so because of that, they have an opportunity, like I said, to build a new narrative. Okay. And so now I'm trying to get back to your original question, which was how do you know what to start with when it comes to building a campaign? So in the instance of Minnesota, I have a piece coming up about a Rolling Stone piece coming out about this in a few weeks, too. It's got to hit an emotional chord. What is your vision? What is your vision for where do we go now? And also, if there's a way for large campaigns that you want to have ongoing for quite a while, I think it's really important to make it clear the role that people can play in that narrative. What can the rest of people do, right? What can everybody else who's watching? How can they participate? How can they support? How can they be part of this campaign and new narrative of Minnesota rebuilding itself and continuing to stand in solidarity and represent justice and supporting and loving one another? And then there's ways to keep that, there's ways to craft stories and integrate those stories as the building blocks into the narrative, right? Something about Minnesota that I was told, which I didn't really think of until I got there, was that because of the history of logging businesses there, and because there's a history of homegrown businesses that have long family legacies, some of the startups have that mindset ingrained in them as well. And I find that rare in startups. I don't know if you've worked with many startup founders, but they're usually very fast and furious. We got to get the ROI for our investors. We got to pivot hard, fast. We got to go. We got to churn and burn. I think it's incredibly unhealthy, but I understand why that happens, because they're trying to make money back for their investor. But now I'm going off kind of into startup land too much. I think. Good.
Yeah, no, but what you said was really helpful. Where do we go now, and what role can people play? Really, so start with kind of what's the goal, and then what stories can you tell around it, to help touch people, to help move people, right?
I have something here. I brought up a Substack piece that I wrote last year, and it's storytelling tips for the climate movement. And the last point I made is give people a role they want to play. Nobody wants to join a losing team. If our story is just about suffering, sacrifice, and pushing a boulder uphill while billionaires retreat from their once upon a time gold and green mission, people will check out. We need to make the audience the hero. You're not just recycling, you're part of the generation that saved the planet. Your vote isn't just a civic duty, it's standing up to the people betting on your silence. People need to feel powerful, not just aware. We can write them the script where they get to win.
That, and I'll ask you for a couple of tips in a minute. But I just want to also talk about this difference between, you say know your audience, but some campaigns have the goal of reaching the masses to motivate people, like to go out, get out to vote. That's like reaching everybody. And then there's niches, and there are some people who believe that niching way down is better than reaching the masses. So where do you, and you talk in your book about the stage is not the table. So that's kind of what it reminded me of. So how do you decide? And I realize that, something is, it's obvious when you're talking about getting people out to vote, but even then it could be different types of people getting them out to vote, right? So you can have a niche of voters.
Different things are going to resonate with different people. Different.
Yeah. Go ahead. So what would you suggest?
What would I suggest in terms of whether the strategy should be reaching the masses or niche audiences?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if this is a cop-out answer, but I think anytime you can do both is useful. So in the same way that as a thought leader, it's important to, if you're building your personal brand, it's important to go after being on big stages and being in mainstream legacy publications. If your area of expertise is somewhat niche, right? Like if it's about ensuring that there will be justice in outer space once we start populating the planet, right? That is a very specific niche thing. And I know different organizations that are focused on that, right? So they're going to want to, that could possibly be a big story once those things are accomplished and once there's a roadmap in place and once there's a need, like a real on the ground need in space for that to happen. So that could be a headline news story, a big campaign, but it's also very nerdy. It's very specific. It's very granular. And so I'd want them also to hit some niche podcasts and some journalists and influencers and creators who focus on geeky things like that, right? And then there's the different buckets they can go into, the need for justice anywhere and everywhere. What does that even look like in places that we haven't, where we don't really have jurisdiction yet, right? So I think it's both. I think it's the masses and niche. Now, if you're a household name, you don't have to go niche, right? If you're a household name, you just hit the masses. If you're a massive star, if you're a household brand, I think going far and going wide, you don't have to. But some brands are able to do both all at once. And I'm thinking of an Apple ad in particular. Do you remember that Apple ad? Remember what was it? Not Remember the Geniuses. It was kind of like the Rebels.
Yeah. It was. I think it was Remember the Genius. I think it was Remember the Genius. I don't think it was Geniuses. And then they had, you mean the one with faces of like Einstein and.
Yeah. What was that campaign? What was it called?
Well, he did a Think Different campaign many years ago. But that you're talking about one that is about that. It's very cool, actually. It's interesting. What I'm thinking of is there's so many, but you're right. I mean, I agree with you that it's really both wide and narrow, because you also don't know who you're going to reach. I mean, you have to have a target in mind, and you have to know what your goal is and what metrics you're going to look at. But at the same time, you're going to touch people you didn't know you touched. I mean, just on a purely basic level, I get emails and comments from people in response to things that I post in my show and in articles that I don't know who they are, and I didn't know that that particular thing was going to touch them. And they get touched by things that always surprise me. And that's the beauty of what makes people people to me, is you don't know which part of the grammar of emotion is going to hit them, right? You just tell a story and you don't know, well, it could be somebody, you talk about the arc of struggle to transformation. It's like, well, they could be at the beginning of the struggle and this transformation might inspire them, or they could be at the, having come out to something cool and not even realized how far they had come until that story was told. So you don't know what's really gonna hit them, right?
Yeah.
I could talk to you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the name of the campaign was called Remember the Crazy Ones.
Oh yeah, that's good. Yes,
the crazy ones.
People like
but
me,
but to your
who are crazy.
I wanted to touch on what you were just saying, because I think it's such an important point for people to remember, for anyone who's using their voice and telling their stories, whether it's for business or for a more personal reason. You never know which part of what you're sharing is going to strike a chord with someone, right? There was a talk that I gave a few weeks ago in Mexico at a retreat, and I was talking a little bit about Beyond the Mic Drop. I shared a few themes from the books, not that many, but I said something about, how I loved holding a microphone, how I loved just the way it feels in my hands, how I loved the reverberation, the echo that comes back, because it's a confidence booster, right? And our posture immediately changes when we're holding a mic. You're holding a microphone right now, like your posture changes when you're standing, your diaphragm, we start to breathe from it more correctly. It opens everything up. And at the end I said, so my closing comment is, next time you have something to say, grab the mic with both hands. And I had a number of women come up to me and say, oh my God, I love the part when you said grab the mic with both hands. And that was just something that I threw in at the end. It was not something that I thought would be emotional for anyone, but they felt so, they could feel themselves holding it, I guess. And that, so it felt visceral in a way. So yeah, you just never know that, but that's why it's so important just to get out there and use your voice and tell your stories. You never know who it's going to hit, whose life it could impact, whose mind you could change.
Absolutely. I mean, I think my story of ending up in the green economy when I was recruited by Chrysler to head up communications and co-head sales and marketing of their electric car division. I'd never worked in the car business. I didn't have the word vehicle or automotive anywhere in my resume. I didn't even own a car at the time. I didn't live where they were. And if they had posted a job and I had applied, they'd never know my name. And they moved me to the Midwest, and it changed my life.
Wow.
And people have said to me, I mean, it was a big risk. My friends thought I needed a frontal lobotomy when I told them. They moved me to Fargo, North Dakota, by the way. New York City girl lived in.
Oh, wow. I didn't know it was Fargo.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. So, but it changed my life for the better. And I've had people come up to me when I've told that story at different places and said, oh my God, I was faced with XYZ, and your story kind of gave me the confidence to say, maybe this thing that's resonating inside of me from that offer is saying, yeah, go, because you never know. I mean, just, that you're going to get through it, whatever it is, you're going to get through it. I mean, I figured the worst that happens is I hate it and I leave, right? It's like when I've been moved by companies in other contexts into other places. And so it's a matter of having confidence and knowing that you can handle the choice. But I want to get back to a couple things that you said in the book, and then get some career advice from you for women. You talked about a very hot topic at the moment, the ethics of storytelling in a polarized world. I mean, oh my God, Melissa. Explain what the ethics of storytelling in a polarized world is and how we do it.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'll start with, I think that was one of the additional chapters that I added last minute. because I was thinking I can't talk about storytelling if I don't talk about the ethics. We live in a world where most of us consume information and news and stories from our phone, from our social feeds, and from websites. And a lot of creators and influencers and journalists doing that lead with outrage or optimism. I've done that before. I didn't think of it that way, that's what I was doing. But what gets kind of like how with newspapers, it was and still is, if it bleeds, it leads. With the algorithm, it's been, if it's outrageous and it's angry or infuriated or it's completely, crazy, then that's going to get you into another algorithm that's going to get more followers that aren't already following you. So misinformation travels much faster than facts. There have been studies done about this by MIT, and I'm guessing many other institutions and organizations. And by the time it actually does get fact checked or someone calls it out, a ton of damage has already been done. Most people are not going to fact check things. They're just not going to. In Journalism 101, we learned that you should have at least 3 sources, not just 3 sources that you quoted, but just 3 sources around the reporting that you are using, right? And unfortunately, what's happening right now is there might be more to it than this. I haven't worked in a newsroom in a long time, but it used to be at the newsroom in CNN or Associated Press, we get the news feed, right? The wire of all the things that just happened on the ground in, say, Afghanistan, and we'll get a short blurb about it. And then a producer or reporter will get that information and then do reporting. They'll call people on the ground, they'll fact check it, they'll get quotes, they'll find a way to enhance the story. And so that's great. That's real reporting. What's happening right now, I see a lot in the news, and this isn't new. This didn't just happen the last year. What's been happening for well over a decade, I'd say probably when social media started beating newsrooms to the punch when it came to storytelling, is there's some news that gets out there there's no real reporting. I can tell by looking at the headline and by the content of the article that whoever worked in whoever got that story from the newswire just took it, regurgitated it a little bit, and then put it out. And then what's happening is all these creators and influencers are taking that information and putting their hot take or their spin on it. And there's a lot of creators and influencers out there that I do think do a phenomenal job. Not only with, some of them do their own reporting. I don't even know if they realize they're doing reporting, but some of them are doing reporting. Some of them aren't. They're just taking the information and complaining about it and putting their twist on it. But we need the news. We need the news because something that bothers me sometimes when people say, oh, I don't even look at legacy news because you can't trust them. And so I just look at such and such and such influencer or podcaster. Guess where that podcaster got most of their information? They got it from the news. And as I was just saying, we need to hold the news accountable. We need to keep critiquing them. We definitely need to hold them accountable, especially now since only like one family is going to own everything, right? But we still need real journalists, and that's lacking. So we need more ethical journalism from the actual sources that a lot of us are getting our information. And by that, I mean like multiple stages of fact checking, multiple sources. And I'm hoping that, there will be some kind of revolution around media literacy, that more and more people are just going to want to know that what they're consuming is real. It's so hard. It's so hard these days, especially with AI. Remember when the cartel chaos was going on in Mexico about a month ago? Some of the images that were generated around that were AI. There was a plane exploding. That was AI, right? But that image actually looked very real. And by the time it's exposed that it's AI, so much panic and uproar has already happened. And so ethics, I mean, I think there is a such thing as ethical journalism. I think a lot of independent newsrooms strive for that. I think a lot of independent journalists strive for that. And I think a lot of journalists that work for legacy networks have strived for that their career. Yeah. They've got executive producers and bosses and sponsors and other underwriters that do dictate some of what they do. There's no question about that. That's been going on since the beginning of news. But it just it's such a hard question. It's sometimes people will say things, oh, well, I don't watch this network because they're not objective. And I said, well, there's no such thing as objectivity in news. All you can do is strive to be to get as many different perspectives as you can. And some people say, well, that's only one side of the story. There's always two. There's more than two sides to every story, right? There's an infinite number of sides to every story. And so I don't think I have an exact number for what ethics, how we do it right now, but I know that we need to work on finding out a way to make real information travel faster, and if that means sexing it up in some way, to me, as long as it's factual, get it done, because the misinformation that spreads is too damaging. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Interesting about that. And you talked in your book also about artificial intelligence and conscious intelligence, that I've had people who are experts in AI say to me, because I'm, as a journalist and as a creator, I'm very conscious of what I put into the chat bots and what I don't. And I'm very protective of it, right? And I've got all the privacy settings, et cetera, because, and at Forbes, we had editors who were, gave us techniques on that as well. But I'm also on the flip side, kind of what you're saying is, if I've had AI experts say to me, post good stuff online, because the more good stuff that's out there and the more factual stuff that's out there, especially about things like climate, the more that's going to become the basis of the large language model that they're using to scan, rather than the garbage, because we know the garbage is going to keep coming. But if we put more and more good stuff, on valid stuff and factual stuff up there, then we can try at least to counter it, but at best to make the garbage be less, right? A smaller percentage. So it's a really good point. Let me just ask you two quick things and then get some advice from you. You talked a little bit about, in your book, about and this kind of ties into the stories we inherit. And I referenced this a minute ago, that they influence us too. And I'm finding in my book on women in wealth and impact that those stories really affect how we spend money and how we look at money and what we do with money. And it's generational and it's cultural and it's got, as you say, 80,000 layers to it. So talk the stories we inherit, though, because we forget that those are actually stories that somebody wrote, that something happened, and we interpreted them a certain way, right? And how we interpret them affects how we see them and what narrative we took from that.
Yeah, especially because usually when we hear a story, when we inherit a story, it's at a very young age. Not that we don't inherit stories at other ages too, but if there's something having to do with generational money trauma or wealth or issues with our family or our neighbors or whatever it is, it happens at such a young age, right? A story of, well, your great grandmother did X, Y, and Z, and so you're probably going to turn out the same way. And that could be good or bad. That could be good or bad. Or your uncle was the champion at this, so maybe you'll inherit that gene. Or yeah. And like in my book, I talk about my adoption story, about how I was told that I was left on the police station steps the day I was born in Seoul, Korea. And it turned out that that's not true. That was a story that was just handed to me. They said, this is what happened. And once I actually investigated it, it turned out to not be true. So I just think it's important to investigate the stories that are handed to us, right? Mm-hmm. We need to investigate the stories we come up with on our own too. We need to come up with our own stories that are based on external validation or lack thereof, or based on insecurities we have that have been enforced by people around us. And we need to check our egos. I think we need to check our own stories that we create on our own, but those are influenced by outside factors usually. But stories that, when we're in a place where we know, actually, Like, okay, so there's a story around women. Let's say the story is women aren't good at math, right? Let's just say someone came up with the idea that women aren't good at math. And so then a whole generation of women decide not to go into being mathematicians and just rely on men to do their accounting and their taxes and handle all of the family finances, right? So that story's been challenged enough times that we know that there are plenty of women who are geniuses at math. Right. And so I just think it's important to do our own internal discovery around stories that we hear about ourselves, and also check ourselves on the stories that we come up with on our own about who we are and about what we're able to become.
I love that. And the stories, the narrative that we developed around something, that an experience that we had. So after going through a struggle and some kind of transformation that comes out of it, or coming out the other side, one way or the other, our narrative can change. It's like it went from, oh my God, this sucks and that sucks, to, hey, that was a learning experience. I learned X, Y, and Z, which is a completely different framing from what we had before. So my point is our own narrative in our own heads about an experience can change as well, right? As well as the ones that we inherit.
Absolutely.
So just
absolutely.
Yeah. So give us a couple of tips for great storytelling. You've given several throughout our conversation, especially around the emotional piece. But what would be a couple of other good tips for great storytelling, especially about climate and energy or sustainability, social causes?
Sure. Well, I touched on one of them earlier when I read that excerpt from a Substack, which was give people a role they want to play, right? And that means help them see that they're in a winning situation, right? And it's so easy right now to look at what's happening in climate change and in environmentalism to say, oh, we're on the losing team. We're not going to get anywhere because of the federal government. But that's only one way of looking at it. If you look at all the grassroots initiatives, right? If you look at what people like what you're doing on a corporate level, all the experience you had interviewing women that are innovating in energy, whether that's in the automobile industry or whether that's other parts of the corporate world. If we look at people that are discovering things about the ocean, the scientist you mentioned that created, what was the ocean technology that she created?
Eco-wave technology, eco-wave power.
Eco-wave power. So there are so many miraculous innovations happening like that at a grand scale and a smaller scale. There were these kids that I met in Oaxaca, Mexico, 2 years ago after I left COP16, when I felt really jaded by the fact that Indigenous people are not a part of the negotiation conversations. I was kind of like, what am I doing in the climate movement? Everything is just one giant offset. Like everything, every idea, anything at a high government level, everything is just one giant offset. That's what I was convinced of. And so when I went to Oaxaca, I met these kids who created their own green pharmacy, meaning they decided to rescue the ancestral medicinal wisdom around plants from their elders. And they created a green pharmacy at their school and they turned it into a business. They created their own water catchment system and their own recycling system. This little indigenous school in the Zapotec villages in the mountains. And there's so many incredible local stories. So I think what's your question again? It's around tips for great story, climate movement. What was the question again? What are some tips for great storytelling, particularly for climate movement?
And I love that you're I love that you're saying that remind people that they have agency. Yes, basically, is what you're saying.
Remind people that they have agency. I'd also just say one more thing too. I think something that the climate movement does a lot. We're on the defensive a lot, right? We're responding. We're constantly responding to things. We're responding to what Trump just did. We're responding to the endangerment finding being repealed. And of course, we need to. We have to have. It's important to respond to terrible things that are happening in our country and around the world when it comes to climate action and so many countless important issues happening globally. But we need to be proactive. We need to be generative. We need to be thinking about what is the stance that we're taking, though, as a movement? What are the things we know we can do? What are we celebrating? Because every day there's something to celebrate. The ocean wave innovation that you just mentioned, the kids that I met in Oaxaca, all these different groups. LA Climate Week is next week. SF Climate Week is next week. DC Climate Week's happening at the same time. There's all these citywide climate weeks still happening. It's still moving. We're still pushing forward, and that is to be celebrated, right? And despite this other narrative that that we're doomed. So I think we need to tell a story of being on a winning team and give people a role they want to play. The other thing I touched on earlier was telling a story through the lens of an unexpected messenger. Someone who we wouldn't normally see have the mic when it comes to climate action. Mm-hmm. Either they went through some kind of personal change, or they discovered an innovation, or they had a change of heart, just something in them clicked and changed. And then like, we need to stop being on the defensive so much, right? We're just reacting. It's just like how the Democrats are always reacting to the Republicans. They're not going to get anywhere unless they have a solid, unified, generative, proactive storytelling of what they stand for and what their vision is. And that's what the climate movement needs. It can't just be us reacting to the damage, right? But there's regenerative initiatives too. There's regenerative books. There's amazing things happening in regenerative agriculture every day. And so again, I think just getting more unified. And we need to stop being the fact police on things, right? As soon as, whenever someone says something about climate, and then we're like, oh, that's not true, and here's the link, here's the source. We're not going to be able to fact check people into submission. That doesn't work. What happens when we share links and sources, whether it's about climate or any other social issue, usually people just buckle down even harder. They double down on their stance. It's called the backfire effect when that happens. And that's been going on for a long time, but ever since the social media, really, I think it gets worse every year, the backfire effect, when people are in a debate and then someone shares a link to verify what they just said, and then the other person doubles down. It's like, I don't care. We're not going to get people to see the light through doing that. Nobody likes to have facts thrown at them. And so we need to get them through the grammar of emotion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Through seeing themselves. Yeah, they need to see themselves in the larger climate story, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. There reminds me of an unexpected messenger story that I heard about recently. It was a film, believe it or not, on carbon, and the people in the story are dyed-in-the-wool, third, fourth, fifth generation farmers in deep red Midwest who were struggling farmers, and they discovered this way of saving money, saving their farm for future generations by doing clean energy kinds of things and leveraging their land with some of it was community solar, some of it was other stuff. And these people you would ever expect to see in any kind of a story about climate or whatever. And then so they're just talking about this stuff, and you see and you feel how they talk about it and how different it is from how bless their hearts, the people and you and I have been knee deep in this stuff for years, but we have to get out of, I try to speak English, right? I don't try to speak climate. I try to speak English. And what I say to people when they come up with something garbage, I say, well, I can actually give you the facts on that if you're interested at some point, but nonetheless, and then I move on just to kind of put a pin in it. And then if they want it, they know where to find it. But also to anybody else who's listening, they can come back to it. Plus, also just makes my conscience feel better to not let it go by. But I could talk to you for about a week, but I need to let you go.
Yeah.
So before I let you go, I like to give career advice to mid-career women. So think about a woman who has at least 10 years of experience, maybe 15. She has an education. She knows what she's good at from that experience. She wants to excel, to make money, advance her career, and make a difference. So what advice would you give to her?
Oh boy. Well, when I was 10 years into my career, that's when I was living on my best friend's couch for that 6-month period, and I felt like a failure. And so I had to really take a hard look at my life. What was I doing? I was educated and I had aspirations of being this high-powered journalist, but I wasn't sure of what kind anymore. I'd started to see too much. I was an entertainment producer first, then business, and I saw too many kind of corrupt things happening in that world of media. And it just came down to what moves me as a person. What has broken my heart wide open and given me hope for myself, for my friends, for my community, for the world, for benefiting humanity. And so I think for someone who's 10 years into their career, they've already seen some stuff. You know, they've already gone through some trenches to some degree. They've probably already had some struggles and some challenges and some great triumphs. It was a real turning point for me at that point, 10 years in, because I felt lost until someone said, you really need to start looking at yourself differently. You're looking at yourself as one thing, you know, but your skills, your assets, your talents, your passion can be so many things to so many other people. So if the person is kind of struggling on direction or purpose, I think that's a good start. Is just kind of, I guess, another way of saying it is try to look outside yourself a bit. It's very easy to, it's very hard to see ourselves clearly. And I don't know if we ever really do see ourselves clearly, right? Do we ever? I don't know, because I'm never going to see myself any other way than through the inside of my own lens, right? And it's always kind of our friends or total strangers that see a gift or something magical about us that we're like, oh, I never thought of that. And right, it can change our whole perception. And so if you're able to just talk to other people and say, you know, it's kind of a self-indulgent question, I suppose, and a lot of people probably don't want to ask it, but what do you see in my skill set and in my energy and in what I've accomplished so far and what I could do that maybe I'm not looking at, you know, because it is so hard to see ourselves clearly. We get in our own way. We're so hard on ourselves. You know, I think anybody 10 years in, a decade into the workforce too, it's important to celebrate our wins. I certainly don't celebrate my wins enough. I'm in the shower or I'm on the street running, complaining to myself about the thing that I didn't do right or the thing I didn't do on time or why'd I wait that long or, you know, I think it gets hopefully easier with age if for people that have learned to kind of self-heal in that way, but it's still hard. But yeah, try to see if you are struggling, if you're mid-career and you're struggling with purpose or what to do or what your next move is. Remember that you're not a one-trick pony. You probably have skills and ideas and dreams and gifts that again could be so many things to so many people. No one is you, you know. Sometimes, and this might kind of sound strange, but sometimes people they'll look at something that they see as a weakness that someone else might see as a strength. I'm just going to tell a really quick story because I know we're running out of time. But I remember I was doing a workshop with a group of women that were all high power entrepreneurs, and my friend wanted me to do a storytelling workshop, and I'm like, they all had communications backgrounds. So I said, they're all comms people. You want me to do this for them. And it just kind of seemed redundant. But she said, no, yeah, because sometimes it takes an outsider looking in at you to kind of see, show you that you can look at yourself from a different perspective. And there was this woman who had this fascinating seasoned military career. She had done incredible things in Afghanistan and in a number of different countries. She was in battle. She understood the military inside and out. She worked in technology. And so she thrived in chaos. And she said, I thrive in chaos and I keep building a world of chaos around me. And I said, is that a bad thing though? You're able to handle chaos in a way that probably nobody else in your orbit can, right? That's a strength. That is something unique that you cultivated because of your experience in the military. And that can be very useful in business environments, right? So, and just don't sell yourself short.
Yeah, you never know. It's interesting because when I work with my career coaching and advice, I call myself an advisor more than a coach because I actually tell people what I think they should do. What I do is I kind of, to your point, is I deconstruct their background. I deconstruct every step along the way and say, okay, so you did this. That means that you can do this, and this. They go, oh, really? Oh, okay. I guess you're right. And then we flip it over, right? And then we come up with they can see what their secret sauce is, if you will, more easily because it's been structured. We're so used to talking and doing resumes and talking in that language that when we break it down into, okay, so what does that mean that you developed that campaign? It means that you understood the audience. It means that you figured out how to tell a story. It means that you figured out, the media piece. I mean, you break it down into the pieces. And then it's like taking what I describe it as is where each of us is a jigsaw puzzle. And you can, right now, the pieces look like they are, but you can take the pieces apart and make a new picture.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Beautiful.
Right?
Yeah. I love your deconstruction process.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Any final thoughts before I let you get back to your life?
No, this was so much fun. And you're right. We could probably talk for weeks about this. I will be in DC in 2 weeks for Earth Day. Will you be back? Will you be in DC? Okay.
Be here. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's do something. Definitely.
Yeah. And just thank you for having me, and thank you for everything that you do to platform and amplify women working in climate, and because it makes a huge difference. And I'm so glad that we finally got to do it. And thank you for perusing the book. You went through it fast. I'm just excited to be able to share this with everybody after you're done.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today on Electric Ladies Podcast, Melissa Jun Rowley of any of a number of things, including her new book, Beyond the Mic Drop. Thank you for joining us. And can they pre-order your book now, by the way?
Yes, they can go to melissajunrowley.com. It's my full name, melissajunrowley.com. I can send all the links. But it will officially be on pre-order in all the online stores via Ingram starting in May, and then it will be available in June.
Okay, perfect. Absolutely perfect. So thank you so much, Melissa. I appreciate it. So how do you tell stories? Which tips and insights from Melissa caught your attention in particular? How are you going to use, I love that phrase, the grabber of emotion in your stories? Post it to us on LinkedIn and Twitter. And yes, I will always call it Twitter, and I am on sometimes, at Joan Michelson, and send us any questions there as well. Tell us you're a listener of Electric Ladies Podcast too, and you may win a 30-minute complimentary session with me. I've met fabulous people that way. And please subscribe to our mailing list to stay abreast of our amazing guests like Melissa, our articles and career advice and events and all those good things. We also have a membership platform coming soon too. So when you subscribe, you can sign up for that as well. And sign up on electricladiespodcast.com. Please remember, you are talented, your ambition is a gift. Seize the opportunities that abound even now at the intersection of innovation, energy, climate, and sustainability. I'm Joan Michelson. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.